It was an ordinary afternoon in the small town of Willow Creek. The sun hung high in the clear blue sky, casting a golden glow over the streets lined with modest homes, mom-and-pop stores, and a park bustling with children's laughter. The rhythm of the town was as predictable as the weather, calm and unassuming, a place where everyone knew everyone's business. Amid this tranquil scene, 15-year-old Jamal Carter made his way home from school, his well-worn backpack slung over one shoulder. He moved with the easy confidence of a boy who knew every crack in the sidewalk, every shortcut through the back alleys. His face, framed by an optimistic smile, reflected the aspirations of a young man determined to rise above his circumstances. Jamal was no stranger to hard work or dreams. His days were packed with school, odd jobs to help his single mother, and nights spent poring over textbooks by the dim light of a bedside lamp. He loved basketball, science experiments, and sketching designs for inventions he was certain would one day make life easier for people like his mom. Jamal believed in a better future, and though his community had its share of challenges, he saw potential everywhere he looked. As he rode his bike down Main Street, waving at familiar faces, he thought about the big math test coming up and the sneakers he'd been saving for. His world, while limited, felt manageable. Until, that is, the unmistakable sound of tires crunching on gravel signaled the arrival of something that always seemed to dim the light of his small world. A police cruiser rolled up beside him. Its blue and white paint glinted in the sunlight, but the sight of it sent a chill through Jamal. He slowed his bike, his heart skipping a beat as the car matched his pace. From inside, Officer Grayson, a man notorious in Willow Creek for his heavy-handed treatment of young black men, stared at him with an expression that was anything but friendly. The once peaceful air thickened with tension. Jamal glanced ahead, calculating how far he was from home, wondering if he could make it there before the officer decided to act. But it was too late. Grayson hit the brakes, the car jerking to a stop just ahead of Jamal, cutting off his path. Jamal stopped his bike, gripping the handlebars tightly. He kept his head up, though his heart was pounding. His mother had always told him to stay calm in these situations, to be polite, to avoid confrontation. "Keep your hands visible and your answers short," she'd said. "Come home safe. That's all that matters." Grayson stepped out of the car, adjusting his belt as he approached. His boots hit the pavement with a deliberate rhythm, a sound that seemed to echo too loudly in the otherwise quiet street. Jamal forced himself to meet the officer's gaze, trying to project the calm his mother had drilled into him. "Where are you headed, kid?" Grayson's voice was sharp, tinged with suspicion. "Just home, sir," Jamal replied evenly, his voice steady, despite the knot forming in his stomach. Grayson's eyes swept over Jamal, taking in his backpack, his bike, the worn soles of his sneakers. To Jamal, it felt like the officer wasn't seeing a kid heading home after school. He was seeing something else, something dangerous, something Jamal wasn't. "You got ID on you?" Grayson asked, crossing his arms. Jamal's heart sank. "I don't, sir. Just coming back from school." Grayson's lips curled into a faint smirk, one that didn't reach his eyes. "Riding this route looks suspicious. A lot of break-ins around here lately. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" The insinuation stung, but Jamal swallowed the lump in his throat. "No, sir. Just trying to get home." Around them, a few passers-by slowed, their faces showing varying degrees of concern and curiosity. Jamal felt the weight of their stares, some sympathetic, others indifferent. He gripped the handlebars tighter, his youthful dreams momentarily overshadowed by the grim reality he'd encountered too often. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension, setting the stage for what was to come. For Jamal, this was more than a confrontation. It was another test of his resolve to hold on to his dignity in a world that seemed intent on stripping it away. And as Grayson continued his scrutiny, the bright afternoon in Willow Creek dimmed, its peace fractured by suspicion and prejudice. Jamal Carter was the kind of teenager every parent hoped to raise, hard-working, thoughtful, and driven by a purpose far beyond his years. At 15, he carried himself with a quiet confidence that belied the challenges he faced daily in his small, economically struggling community. A straight-A student with dreams of becoming a lawyer, Jamal envisioned himself fighting for justice and equality, inspired by the stories his grandmother had told him about civil rights leaders. His goal was to not only rise above his circumstances, but to create a better path for those who would follow. His family played a central role in shaping his character. Jamal's mother, a nurse working grueling hours, and his grandmother, a retired teacher, had instilled in him the importance of education and self-respect. Their small home was filled with love and a deep sense of resilience. Jamal often helped his younger siblings with their homework and assisted his grandmother in tending to their modest garden, which she called their patch of hope. Despite the systemic barriers his family faced, they taught him to hold his head high and never let the world dictate his worth. That day had begun like any other. Jamal had spent the morning immersed in his studies, preparing for a debate competition that would be held at school the following week. His topic: the role of systemic reform in achieving justice. It was a subject close to his heart, one that he spoke about passionately during his family's nightly discussions around the dinner table. After school, he had stopped by the community center to help organize a book drive for underprivileged children, a cause he deeply cared about. As he walked home, his mind was filled with thoughts of his debate outline and the excitement of seeing his little brother's face light up when he got home. But the peace of Jamal's day was about to shatter. Officer Grayson had patrolled the streets of Willow Creek for over a decade. To some in the community, he was an emblem of law and order. To others, particularly the marginalized, he was a figure of intimidation and unchecked power. Known for his sharp tongue and aggressive demeanor, Grayson had developed a reputation for targeting young black men under the guise of preventing crime. In his eyes, their mere presence in certain areas was enough to justify suspicion. Grayson operated with a sense of invincibility, bolstered by a department that rarely questioned his actions. His pattern of singling out individuals based on their appearance had gone unchallenged for years, his excuses of just doing my job shielding him from accountability. For him, it wasn't about protecting and serving. It was about control and reinforcing the invisible lines he believed separated them from us. As Jamal approached his neighborhood on that sunny afternoon, Grayson spotted him from his cruiser. To Grayson, Jamal wasn't a hard-working teenager heading home after a day of community service and school. He was just another kid who didn't belong in the area, a potential threat that needed to be managed. The stark contrast between Jamal's world and Grayson's perspective set the stage for what was about to unfold. One carried dreams of justice and progress, while the other sought to maintain a status quo built on fear and prejudice. The collision of these two lives would expose the deep fractures within the community and test the resolve of one young man to rise above the bias that sought to diminish him. Jamal had barely turned the corner onto his block when he heard the blare of a car horn. Startled, he glanced back to see a police cruiser edging closer to the curb. The officer inside motioned for him to stop. Jamal froze, his pulse quickening. He hadn't done anything wrong, but the stories he'd heard about encounters like this played in his mind like a cautionary tale. "Stop right there," barked Officer Grayson as he stepped out of the car. The man's eyes scanned Jamal with a mix of suspicion and disdain. Jamal swallowed hard, gripping the straps of his backpack. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice trembling slightly, though he worked to keep it steady. His mother's words echoed in his mind. "Stay calm. Be polite. Get home safe." "What are you doing around here?" the officer demanded, his tone sharp and accusatory. "This isn't your neighborhood." Jamal blinked, confused. "I live just down the street, sir. I'm heading home." Grayson narrowed his eyes, unconvinced. "Is that so? Why were you walking so fast? What's in the bag?" "My school books," Jamal replied, keeping his hands visible. "I had a debate practice after school." The officer's face hardened. "Debate, huh? Sounds like a cover story. Let me see what's in there." Jamal hesitated, his stomach twisting. "It's just school stuff, sir." "Open it," Grayson snapped, his hand hovering near his belt. Jamal slowly unzipped his bag and showed its contents: a worn notebook, a water bottle, and a few textbooks. Grayson peered inside, his expression unchanging. "Doesn't mean anything," he muttered. "Turn out your pockets." Jamal complied, fighting back the anger rising in his chest. As he emptied his pockets, revealing nothing but a few coins and a keychain, Grayson took a step closer, his posture looming. "Acting nervous," Grayson said, his voice laced with accusation. "What are you hiding?" "I'm not hiding anything," Jamal replied, his voice firmer now. "I just want to go home." But Grayson wasn't done. He grabbed Jamal's arm, spinning him around. Jamal flinched as the officer shoved him against the cruiser. "Resisting, are we?" Grayson growled, twisting Jamal's arm behind his back. Jamal yelped in pain, his heart racing as he felt the cold metal of handcuffs on his wrists. "I didn't do anything," Jamal protested, his voice cracking. "Yeah, they all say that," Grayson retorted, tightening the cuffs unnecessarily. By now, a small crowd had gathered at a distance. Some onlookers whispered among themselves, while others pulled out their phones to record the encounter. A woman called out, "Leave him alone. He's just a kid." But Grayson ignored her, his focus on asserting control. Jamal's face burned with humiliation as he stood cuffed, his backpack spilled onto the ground. His mind raced, alternating between fear and disbelief. How had a normal walk home turned into this nightmare? After what felt like an eternity, Grayson shoved Jamal into the back seat of the cruiser. "We'll sort this out at the station," he muttered. The crowd murmured louder, emboldened by their growing numbers. "This is wrong," shouted another voice. Someone stepped forward, phone held high, capturing every moment. Grayson hesitated, the presence of cameras finally registering. He shot a glare at the onlookers, his bluster faltering slightly. "Move along, folks," he barked. "Nothing to see here." But it was too late. The damage had been done, and the evidence was recorded. At home, Jamal's family was blindsided when they received the call. His mother's hands shook as she listened to the officer's curt explanation about her son's detainment. She didn't need details to know what had happened. The crack in her voice as she called her husband said it all. When Jamal was finally released hours later, his family was waiting for him outside the station. His mother ran to him, her face streaked with tears, while his father stood tense, his fists clenched at his sides. The sight of Jamal's red wrists from the handcuffs, sent a wave of fury through his father. "We're filing a complaint," his father said, his voice low and steely. "This isn't going to stand." The complaint was lodged the very next day, but when the family arrived at the precinct, they were met with indifference. The officer was following procedure, the desk sergeant said dismissively. "Your son fit the description of a suspect. Case closed." The family's frustration mounted, but their voices alone weren't enough to shake the system. It wasn't until a video surfaced online showing the entirety of Jamal's encounter with Grayson that the tide began to turn. The footage, raw and undeniable, sparked outrage. Social media erupted, demanding accountability. In the days that followed, the video became a rallying cry. Jamal's story resonated far beyond Willow Creek, igniting conversations about bias and injustice in communities across the country. What had begun as one boy's harrowing experience was rapidly becoming a catalyst for change. The video of Jamal's unjust detainment spread like wildfire. Within weeks, it had garnered millions of views, resonating with people far beyond the small town of Willow Creek. The footage, raw, unfiltered, and undeniably damning, captured Officer Grayson's prejudice and abuse of power, sparking outrage across social media platforms. Hashtags calling for justice trended globally, and prominent civil rights activists began amplifying Jamal's story. In Willow Creek, protests erupted almost overnight. Streets that had once been quiet now echoed with chants of "Justice for Jamal" and "End police bias." Signs demanding accountability and systemic reform filled the town square, carried by residents who had finally found a collective voice. Jamal's family, initially overwhelmed by the attention, found themselves at the center of the movement. His mother, once soft-spoken, became a pillar of strength, speaking passionately at rallies about the need to protect every child's dignity. Jamal's father, a measured but firm presence, worked tirelessly with local organizers to ensure the protests remained focused and peaceful. Civil rights groups reached out, offering resources and legal expertise. Lawyers volunteered to assist the family in their fight against the system that had allowed Grayson's actions to go unchecked. National media outlets descended upon Willow Creek, broadcasting the story to households across the country. Interviews with Jamal and his parents painted a vivid picture of the teen's character, a hard-working student with dreams of becoming a lawyer, unfairly targeted because of the color of his skin. His quiet resilience and refusal to let the experience define him became a source of inspiration for many. Meanwhile, pressure mounted on the Willow Creek Police Department. The video had exposed not only Grayson's misconduct, but also the department's failure to hold him accountable. Under scrutiny, the department announced an internal investigation, hoping to appease the growing unrest. But what began as a superficial review quickly uncovered a far more troubling pattern. Reports surfaced of Grayson's long history of targeting young black men under dubious pretenses. Complaints that had been dismissed or ignored now came to light, painting a damning portrait of an officer who had wielded his authority as a weapon. Former victims shared their stories, each one echoing the themes of Jamal's experience: false accusations, intimidation, and humiliation. As evidence of Grayson's misconduct piled up, the police department could no longer shield him. Public pressure, combined with legal threats from civil rights organizations, forced them to act decisively. Grayson was placed on unpaid leave, pending the outcome of multiple investigations. Lawsuits began to surface, filed by individuals emboldened by Jamal's courage to come forward with their own experiences. The once unshakable officer found himself increasingly isolated. His smug confidence had crumbled, replaced by a growing awareness of the consequences of his actions. The community he had policed with an iron fist was now united against him, demanding justice not only for Jamal but for everyone who had suffered under his watch. For Jamal and his family, the revelations were bittersweet. While the tide was turning in their favor, the scars of the incident remained. Yet they found solace in knowing that their fight was part of something much larger, a movement for justice and equality that could no longer be ignored. The public outcry had become a powerful force, proving that even in the face of systemic failure, collective action could spark meaningful change. The tide of justice finally turned. After weeks of protests, public outcry, and mounting evidence of misconduct, the Willow Creek Police Department announced the termination of Officer Grayson. Stripped of his badge and authority, Grayson's fall from power was swift and complete. He now faced criminal charges for his actions, including abuse of power and civil rights violations. For many in the community, his dismissal symbolized a long overdue reckoning. Jamal's family, though relieved to see Grayson held accountable, understood that their fight was far from over. Empowered by the overwhelming support from civil rights organizations, legal advocates, and their neighbors, they turned their attention to ensuring that systemic changes were made. The family partnered with prominent lawyers to push for comprehensive reforms within the Willow Creek Police Department. Together, they drafted proposals for mandatory racial bias training, the establishment of an independent oversight committee to handle complaints against officers, and a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior. Their efforts resonated beyond the legal realm. Town hall meetings became a regular occurrence, with residents voicing their concerns and sharing personal stories of encounters with law enforcement. These meetings fostered a sense of unity as people from different backgrounds came together to demand accountability and fairness. Jamal's family often spoke at these gatherings, their voices steady and resolute, as they emphasized the need for long-term solutions. Change began to take root in Willow Creek. The police department introduced new hiring practices aimed at increasing diversity among its officers and leadership. Community policing programs were initiated, encouraging officers to build genuine relationships with the residents they served. Body cameras became mandatory for all officers, ensuring transparency in their interactions. Perhaps most significantly, every officer underwent mandatory training to confront and address their implicit biases. The transformation extended beyond the police department. Local elections saw an influx of diverse candidates, many of whom were inspired by the movement sparked by Jamal's story. For the first time in years, the town council included representatives from marginalized communities, bringing fresh perspectives to the table. Jamal, though still a teenager, emerged as a symbol of resilience and hope. His family's perseverance had not only brought justice, but had also ignited a movement that reshaped the town's future. Jamal continued to focus on his education, determined to one day become a lawyer and advocate for others facing injustice. His story, once a tale of pain and humiliation, had become a catalyst for progress. The strength of the community was undeniable. What had begun as a singular act of prejudice had blossomed into a united effort to dismantle systemic inequality. Willow Creek, once a town defined by division, became a model for how collective action could pave the way for meaningful change. Jamal and his family stood at the forefront of that transformation, proving that even in the face of adversity, justice and progress were always within reach. In the weeks that followed, Jamal began to heal, not just physically from the bruises left by handcuffs, but emotionally from the scars of humiliation and injustice. The experience, though harrowing, ignited something within him. What had been a simple dream of becoming a lawyer now transformed into a clear mission: to fight for justice and ensure that no one else endured what he had. Jamal became a beacon of resilience and hope, not just for his peers, but for an entire community that rallied behind him. As Jamal returned to school, his classmates looked at him differently, not with pity, but with admiration. Teachers and students alike recognized the strength he had shown in the face of systemic prejudice. He began to channel his energy into organizing events and workshops aimed at educating young people about their rights and fostering conversations about racial inequality. His voice, once silenced in a moment of injustice, became a rallying cry for change. Meanwhile, Officer Grayson faced the full weight of accountability. Jobless and socially ostracized, he became a pariah in the community he had once policed with arrogance. Though he avoided jail time due to a plea deal, his career in law enforcement was irreparably damaged. For Grayson, the consequences of his behavior were inescapable. Alone and disgraced, he was left to reflect on his actions and confront the biases that had defined his career. Whether he would learn from his downfall or continue in denial was a question only time could answer. The town of Willow Creek, however, had moved on toward a brighter future. The ripple effect of Jamal's experience brought new leadership, new policies, and a renewed sense of accountability. The community that had once been fractured found strength in unity, determined to root out prejudice and create a safer, fairer environment for everyone. The final chapter of this story unfolded at a community rally held in the town square. The stage was set with banners reading "Justice and Unity," and the air buzzed with anticipation. Jamal stepped up to the microphone, his family standing proudly in the front row. His voice, clear and steady, carried across the crowd as he shared his story, not as a tale of victimhood but as a testament to resilience and the power of collective action. "They tried to silence me," he said, his eyes scanning the faces of the crowd. "But now the whole world is listening. Together, we've proven that justice is not just a dream, it's a fight worth having." The crowd erupted in applause, the sound echoing through the square. As Jamal's words lingered in the air, the camera panned to his family, his mother's tearful smile, his father's steady gaze, and his siblings' wide-eyed admiration. They had weathered the storm together and emerged stronger for it. In that moment, Jamal stood not just as a survivor, but as a leader, ready to guide his community and inspire others to join the fight for a better tomorrow.